Good morning, everyone. It's so early, even though I'm a day late, but I had gotten several questions on this topic, and I wanted to make sure that I had the time to delve in a little bit and cover it freely without interruption. And Flynn's at an age where we haven't acknowledged his diagnosis directly to him, at least by name. He knows he has to wear leg braces. He knows that some things are harder for him. He knows his muscles get tired. And he knows that he has people help him be his best self. But he doesn't know, hey, I have cerebral palsy. The questions haven't really come yet. So we want to make sure that we approach this with him at the appropriate time. Now just hasn't been that time. Hi, Mom. So it hasn't felt quite right. And so we mostly just focus on inclusion and people that you meet throughout your life and how they look different than you do and how everyone has a place at the table. Talking about disabilities isn't taboo at our house. That's not why we haven't addressed it yet. He's just young. And I've just tried extremely hard personally not to have certain conversations about him with Flynn present, like our topic today. Not because what I'm saying about him is bad, but because I don't want to be his voice or put words in his head. Some of the things we talk about are difficult, and to get him the required help that he needs, sometimes you have to speak truthfully but brutally honest, and I don't necessarily want him to hear me say those things because it's not necessarily my beliefs and my impression of him, but honesty gets the help that he needs. So, and honestly, how rude is it to talk about someone when they're right there? At the doctor's office, I try to involve him now that he's at an age where he can understand a little bit more. I try to involve him in the conversations, even if he says nothing. It's his life, so I try not to talk for him. But at this point in his life, I am his voice, so I have to do that sometimes. But what I'm going to talk about this morning is my side of the story. It involves him. It just happens to involve his circumstances. So I've been asked a lot about the diagnostic process, if I had any suspicions prior to his diagnosis, what that road looked like, and what his care involved, things like that. And I just have a couple of notes to keep me on task over here to make sure that I answer the questions that were asked. So if I am looking this way, that's why. So I talked a lot about this in my blog post that I'd done earlier this year in early February, called The End of Wait and See, which is really about the days leading up to and beyond that diagnostic appointment. But today I just wanted to go a little bit more in depth about the journey to that point. And before I get started, I just wanted to bring up a little note that this is my story. And everything about our story is just that. It's ours. So each journey is different. Everyone's feelings are different every step of the way. So I will only be speaking for myself, even though it's our story. I can't speak for anyone in our family or, any one of our friends, anyone from the outside looking in. These are just my feelings and my reflections on our whole story. And if you're finding yourself on this or a similar path, know that whatever you are feeling about your story is valid. The process is individualistic, and some people grieve about this for a while. Others are unaffected. Some head straight to the acceptance stage, and others follow through the 7 steps of grief. And none of the options is wrong. However, your feeling is your feeling. They're your emotions surrounding the circumstances in your life, and that's okay. And if you need a friend, consider me yours. My inbox is always open and my phone is always on. So basically, I guess I'll just start a little bit from the beginning, but I won't talk all morning. The sun is already coming up. So Flynn was born at 28 weeks, which most of you probably know. I usually get some questions about what exactly went wrong in my pregnancy, and up until my 27th week, everything was normal. And then I developed severe preeclampsia and was admitted to the hospital, and Flynn was born 2 days later. So we just, to save both of us in that, the only cure for preeclampsia is delivery. So that was what we had to do for that. And then of course he went straight to the NICU after that. While he was in the NICU, within his first week, I ended up having a stroke and some postpartum issues. I'll probably touch on that at a later time, but I wanted to bring that up because had I not gone through some neurological events myself, I probably wouldn't have recognized any of the things that I did. So I think that in an odd way kind of helped me going forward. Flynn's NICU stay, he was there for 49 days, during which he had a typical experience of what you would expect of a 28-weeker. No major infections, no major illness. He had stage 0 ROP, which is retinopathy of prematurity, and that's affecting your eyes, and stage 0 is just the beginning stage of that. That's not uncommon in preemies. He had a grade 1 hemorrhage in his brain, and I think that's, as far as the big things that we were looking out for at that time, I think that touches on most of those. And so he was there for 7 weeks. And yeah, we monitored his brain bleed, and I think it was a few months after discharge. We had a couple of ultrasounds of his head, and a few months after discharge, his brain bleed itself had not healed, but the bleeding had stopped, and what was just left underneath the bleed was the damage. But at least his brain was no longer actively bleeding. There was no more blood sitting on his brain. It had absorbed, and we just monitored that, which was a little bit difficult because he also had water on his brain, on the external part of his brain. So it wasn't as pressing of an issue. The hydrocephalus that he had was, because it was on the outside, it wasn't as risky as when they have the internal hydrocephalus. But that made it difficult to monitor the bleed and see the exact level of the damage that was underneath. But at that point he was alive and he was well, and so we were just okay with monitoring that. And I think that was what began our wait and see process. So as time moved on, he had he had all of the delayed milestones. He was just a baby that didn't move much for quite some time. Of course, I enjoyed the snuggles and the non-resistance to hugging me. But as far as his milestones went, they were all delayed. He rolled over after he was 6 months old for the first time, and it was then that I noticed, with him getting more active, that he had not just a preference for his right side, but kind of that the left side was hanging there. And I didn't think that was typical, but as a first-time mom, especially going through all we went through, I cut him a little bit of slack in that area. When you're 3 months early, of course you're going to have delays, and if your one side helps you do those things and the other one is not, then I we were following up with a pediatrician, and he was seeing all these specialists. And if it were a big issue, I assumed that it would have come up already. I didn't know that a preference towards one side of the body before a year can be an indication of something bigger. So, but like I said, he was being followed by a lot of specialists. And at that point, a neurologist wasn't one of them. But after months of having these concerns and these delays, and then beginning early intervention and going to physical therapy and occupational therapy, we decided to get him checked out by a neurologist. And when we had that first visit with that first neurologist, she had some suspicions that cerebral palsy was the cause of that, or that he had had a stroke in utero that wasn't indicated until then. When you have a preemie that's born so early, your biggest concern is keeping them alive. Not that anything like that should have been missed, but because there weren't indicators of that early on, and we were just monitoring this grade 1 bleed as is. Grade 1 is the lowest grade that you can have in a brain bleed, and that wasn't, because it was under control, wasn't as concerning at the time. So it was when he was about 15 months old that we had that first appointment with a neurologist, and then she had sent us to go get his MRI, his first MRI from there, which we did, and it was October 2018. They had to sedate him, so he was under for that, and we that neurologist ended up leaving the practice during that whole process, which we knew in that first appointment. What we didn't know was how hard it would be to get another neurologist. So it took some time for that MRI to actually be read by a professional. It was at least January, I believe, before we saw another neurologist, and her take on it was that the MRI was really abnormal, that the damage was really bad, that she was surprised that he was functioning, and I went by myself to that appointment, and that wasn't necessarily comforting. And though I pushed for a diagnosis and asking, what does that mean? There's damage, but what does that mean for us? She didn't want to diagnose him because he wasn't 3 yet. But if the damage was that significant, I didn't necessarily want to take that answer. So I began searching for other neurologists, but made a follow-up appointment with her to monitor him physically. And then we went back a few months later, and she was saying the same things, but there was no diagnosis that she would give at that time. So we began a hunt for another neurologist, and we went out of the area and we went to Westchester. And that neurologist had said that the damage that she was seeing was common in preemies, and that we would just wait and see what that meant. And at this point, this was over a year after that MRI, and I had seen the reports and I had seen the images and I had done research myself. And in the back of my head, I knew what all of this meant, and I was comfortable with the labels that I was reading because I had done my own research. And I had seen enough articles and journals and blog posts and other experiences to relate our experiences to other experiences. So I felt like I wouldn't be surprised by any label that came along. And at that point, I was getting frustrated that we hadn't gotten any answers at all. We were wasting time without this label, not knowing what this was. And so we began a search for another neurologist. And that was the last neurologist that we had seen. And he was wonderful. And he sat with us for a couple of hours going through the images with us, going over the reports and telling us what these things meant. And while the images don't necessarily match the person, early intervention's an amazing thing. That doesn't mean that we should ignore what the damage looks like. So while we should focus on what Flynn is capable of, and that the brain is an ever-evolving organ, that the damage doesn't go away, and through your life, though it's not a progressive condition, can have different impacts on your life. So he did give us the diagnosis of periventricular leukomalacia, which is damage to the white matter of the brain, and then the umbrella diagnosis of cerebral palsy. And there are different types of CP, as I've mentioned in some of my posts before. If you've seen them, Flynn doesn't have an exact type yet because his physical being doesn't match the damage that is on the MRI. Looking at the MRI, you would think that it was his other side that was affected, and we've always seen the weakness on his left. So with that diagnosis comes other unravelings, and so we will take that when we get that. But as of right now, in this moment, that is what that looked like for us. That it's an ever-evolving process, and that it may be a while before we get a specific type, because intervention kind of changes the structure of the brain, not the physical structure, but the wiring in your brain. So he's made other connections in his brain, other synapses has fired, and he can now compensate for those things that he finds difficult, or he just won't do them. So that's our neurologist journey. I definitely recommend not necessarily going with the care that is near to you, but really doing the research and finding a doctor that fits your family. And the doctors that we had gone to, it's not that they're bad doctors. On paper, they're great. It's that they just didn't have what I wanted in a neurologist for my child. And I wanted to make sure that he was getting the care at the level he needed so that we weren't wasting time, especially approaching school age. And by the time the MRI was read, he wasn't 18 months old anymore. He was close to 3. So we he was still in early intervention, but we wasted a lot of time without a label, without those community resources that we could have had this whole time, which was frustrating to me. But that's why now I speak so openly about this, is that maybe our story could be the story that someone else relates to and makes them go take these steps to follow up with a doctor, to have their concerns addressed with a physical therapist, to go to early intervention and get these answers that they're hoping to get, because those labels can unlock doors. And now with that label, we have access to resources in the community, OPWDD, other services that the school will provide him throughout his schooling that he needs to be able to be his best self. And that's what it's all about. Not finding a label to have that label and latch onto it, but to get that label and accept it and embrace it, because it doesn't change anything. It just unlocks the doors that you need access to have your child be their best self. And post-diagnosis, I mentioned in my post that I mentioned earlier, I felt vindicated. Not victorious, but I felt that I had trust in my gut and I didn't back down, and I fought for him. And I felt like a weight was lifted right after. We finally had a name for this thing, and with that name, like I said, there became so much more available, and I immediately knew that, and that's where that lifted weight came from. I felt less heavy. I felt like I was dragging around less. But that didn't last very long. The next day I felt this crushing blow. I was really sad and I was really overwhelmed. Not because I had a child with a disability. Nothing had changed about him at all as a person. But because I was so scared for his future and what that would look like for him. And with that label, while resources come along with it, embracing that label and not hiding that label, there comes a lot with that. There comes a lot of new weight with that. And the circumstances that surround that label and what the world's view of people with disabilities is. And how you have to fight so hard to belong. I still feel that a lot, but as I found my footing and became a stronger person, a more knowledgeable mom, I found an amazing community of people. Darn it. And there are people out there that make parenting a child with a disability so much more difficult. But there's also a group of people that is so supportive. And darn it. And I know deep down that we'll all be okay. So great. Well, I talked till the sun came up, but I hope that this answered some of the questions that everyone has had about our experience and what that looks like. Like I said, it can be different from person to person. Just because this was our experience doesn't mean that it will be yours or the person next to you. Or even that if your child looks similar to mine or the people that you see, doesn't mean that the diagnosis or the outcome will be the same for you. But if you are seeing things that you are concerned about, don't hesitate to follow your gut, and get those answers, and don't back down. And I think before Flynn, I was a very timid person. I think I still am a little bit, but when it comes to not backing down and getting the answers that are needed to help him, I'm able to be a little bit better and a better version of myself and a stronger version of myself. And when it comes to your kid, you can do the same thing. And if there are any other questions that I can answer directly, I'm not a medical professional. I just play one on TV. Then I'm happy to answer those questions for you. While I can't provide you with a diagnosis, I can provide you with the comfort that comes along with the process. And I'm here all the time to talk if you need it. It's Friday, we made it. So have a fantastic Friday. If the weekend is your time off, I hope you get through this last day with a smile on your face, and that you head into the weekend and enjoy that for all it brings. And I have a 3-day weekend, which I'm pretty excited about. So we made it, and I hope you have a great day. I'm so sorry for my tears. But I'll talk to you all next week. If there's anything that you'd like me to cover specifically, just feel free to reach out. My inbox is always open. Have a great one.